There you go.
Okay, I'm going to begin with prayer and then we'll head into this wonderful day. We do thank our God that whether there's snow or rain or summer heat in the midst of winter, that we know that you are the one who creates and sustains and cares for all these things. And today we enter into further discussion about your servants who invite us into understanding what it means to think in ways that correspond with your thoughts in the world. So open our hearts and our eyes, our ability to speak of you, about you, but mostly to listen to you in this world. So bless Kerry as he leads us and give us ears to hear. We pray this all in your name, you who is Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen.
Man.
So our
Amen.
conversation today, we've finished the introduction. Thank you to Ken Ross, 2 weeks on that. So again,
Yeah.
for those of you in future days who come here, the Christian frame of mind by T.F. Torrance, subtitled Reason, Order, Openness in Theology and Natural Science. This is one of the great books of Torrance trying to bridge the world, bring together the skills and understanding. And we have today with us Kerry Magruder, who is the curator of the collection of the history of science at the University of Oklahoma in Norman, which I was there a year ago at this time with Kerry, spent a month there. So every day pictures are going coming up for me of tours that we did in the library there. If you don't mind just saying a little bit about your vision for what is it that this collection of books is doing there, and what is the value you see of it, and also just what is the future for the world of Torrance studies with what it is you're doing.
Oh, why, thank you, Marty. So we have 100,000 rare books kept in two climate-controlled vaults. And that includes, for example, everything Darwin wrote. We're the largest contributor to the Darwin Online project at Cambridge, other than Cambridge itself. Everything Galileo wrote, we're the primary contributor outside Italy to the National Italian Galileo Digital Library. That includes, for example, 4 works that he annotated or 8 letters of Darwin, to take those 2 examples, but many others. So, it's very hard to find any library in the world that has all 3 of the first editions of Copernicus's De Rev. We do, and those are all digitized on our website. But that's just a taste. We have obscure works. Our goal is to have all the works that any figure of interest to us read. So that includes, for example, the Alchemy and Theology that Isaac Newton read, etc. So history of science doesn't mean uh, like the sidebars in a science textbook. All of us are trying in the profession of the history of science, it's as much cultural as it is intellectual. And we're trying to embed science into a cultural framework, just as we would if we were studying the history of art, the history of music. And so the program here includes a department where people, believe it or not, can actually get degrees in this field. You can't get a job, but we will give you a master's or a PhD in it if you like. So we have graduate students who, like I did back in the 80s, throw caution to the wind and decide to come and get a degree. And the motivation in every case is to try to recover a more interdisciplinary and cultural perspective on the embeddedness of science. What and part of that is, where does the creativity, where do the ideas come from? It's a different perspective when we get to understand these people in their own setting. So, for example, we learned that Newton wrestled his way through an important early modern printing of Basil of Caesarea's works, had a profound effect on him. And not just him, but several generations of natural philosophers revised their views in cosmology after reading Basil in the later 1500s and 1600s. So, so many people are surprised that we include theology, religious works in our collections, but we do. We cannot study the history of science without works in related fields. And this would be very understandable, intelligible to Torrance. Theological science is one of the sciences to so many of the figures we're looking at historically. For example, just one of my favorites is a book I was able to acquire for the collection some years ago. One of the early, um, uh, still 1500s defenses of Copernicus and of the sun being in the center, the earth going around, was actually published by a theologian in Salamanca, Spain, in a commentary on the book of Job. So you may not expect to find a commentary on the book of Job on our shelves, but that's right at home with even a Bible collection we have with everything, from the Geneva Bible and the King James Bible and other works of note in the history of the Bible. So when you put history and science together, history and nature together, and try to think of their interactions, there's not much left out. So our potential scope is very broad, and the scholars here and the grad students who come can craft interdisciplinary projects of a tremendously varied scope. So that right there matches Torrance. Think of his reading and all the people whom he did theology in this mode of constructive conversation. You know, he was in a communion of saints when he quoted Basil to himself, or uh, Duns Scotus or Athanasius or who have you. And so this is a kind of environment where he would feel at home. Here's an example. To do a deep contextual dive into science and religion, we must include pre-modern perspectives. And most of the time, the history of science is studied as an exclusively modern phenomenon. Well, we are one of the few graduate programs and collections that extends our collecting range before the Enlightenment, all the way back not only to printing, but we collect things prior to printing, and we certainly collect the printed editions of ancient writers, including we collect Islamicate and Asian sources as well. So you all know from Torrance that Basil's idea of physics inspired John Philoponus in Athens in the 6th century. His work inspired Islamic physicists who then their ideas came back over into Latin Europe in the 13th century and were picked up by Jean Buridan, who probably is the one who coined the term impetus, that then became the inertia of Galileo, Descartes, and Newton. Nice little trajectory there from Basel into Islamic culture. There was an air of Basel as much as the Latin West, and also for science. So all those works are important to us. We have works by Philoponus as well as Basel, and the works that cite them up and down. Now, it's for that reason the large scope of the collections, both subject area, chronologically, and geographical region, that makes us an appropriate place, I think, to say, let's put Torrance in conversation with science. Now, we will send any scholar who is interested in Torrance needs to start at Princeton and then also Edinburgh. But Torrance engaged such a wide variety of topics and figures, both contemporaries for him and intellectual figures in the past, that they don't all fit in the scope of the Princeton Library, Theological Library, or what you find at Edinburgh. So where can documents that are relevant to Torrance and science find a natural home where scholars can easily access them and Torrance's work not be forgotten but remain a conversation partner in all these areas? So it's for that reason that I felt we would be an appropriate place for materials about Torrance and science that are not, that don't have an institutional home in a more appropriate location. If it's pure theology, Princeton. If Princeton doesn't want it, we want it. If it's the Edinburgh context, go to Edinburgh. If Edinburgh doesn't want it, we want it. And so that's why, for example, you can come here and read both editions of the Christian Frame of Mind, the first edition and the later edition. And our goal is to collect every printed edition of his published works, articles as well as books, UK versions as well as American versions, translations into other languages. You may know that the Trinitarian faith was translated into Arabic and in Egypt. We're still looking for a copy. Some of his works have been translated into Chinese. We have some, but we're looking for more copies. We want every translation, every edition. Um, it's not always the case that we can find all the things we want online. So we want this to be a place where scholars can come and continue the conversations that Torrance has started. Toward that end, we are also collecting papers. So it's not just published sources, but items um, that might not otherwise be preserved. I'm so thankful for the support of Bob Walker. And you remember that he's the one who edited the Torrance's 2 volumes of Dogmatics Lectures at Edinburgh, Incarnation and Atonement. And he edited those from the mimeographed handouts Torrance would use in his lectures. And so Bob has given us his complete set of those mimeographed lectures. If anyone has a question about Bob's editing method, how did he go from the mimeographs to what you read in the books? Well, come here and take a look, and you can see his many notes scribbled on these lectures. But what about those lectures, the mimeographed lecture notes that Torrance would pass out to his students? Are they all the same, or did he revise them over time? So we want those. If you're a student of Torrance and you have sets of those lecture notes and you want to send them to us, we would love to have them. We can't know if they changed over time unless we have multiple varieties.
Right.
So I was very thankful this past November. Stephen May, thank you, Stephen, if you watch this, gave us his set, and we'll add that to the collection. Chris Kaiser has given us some of his as well. And, and especially those are valuable when they have notes from some of his students. You know, something that is not preserved, I hear, at Princeton in the archive there are the prayers that Torrance used to open every lecture, like you did, Marty, for us. Wouldn't that make a difference if we had some kind of a record of his prayers? And sometimes I believe, and I think I've seen occasionally, there's a note or two about the opening prayer in student copies of these mimeographed notes. So if Princeton isn't collecting them, we don't want them to be lost. We're not competing. We just want to make sure that materials that will help the next generation 30, 50 years from now enter into Torrance's world. Well, these kind of materials may help in that way, but many others also. So anyway, that's why you you are now hopefully no longer surprised to learn that in our holdings we have David J. Torrance's set of Bart's Church Dogmatics, David Torrance's son. We have a 1496 edition of Thomas Thomas Aquinas's Summa. Yes, we have Calvin's Institutes. Yes, we have Augustine's City of God, a 1489 edition, and others. Peter Lombard's Sentences, the standard curriculum for theology in the Middle Ages. Um, you know, you just cannot study science in a historical setting without looking at its relationship with religion. And that's true also for our collection of Islamic sources and Asian sources. Would we need a copy of Confucius? You bet. We've got an early edition of Confucius. So so our goal is to make sure that the conversations on science and religion can be deep and profoundly informed by figures like Torrance. Maybe maybe that's more than you wanted, Marty, but
No, that's good.
put me on that
It
horse and I'll ride it for
yeah,
quite
well,
a
it
while.
raises the question of this book, right? This book is saying that Torrance recognizes that there is a history to the Christian frame of mind, and it's not just when Jesus walked the earth. It doesn't begin there. It's much deeper than that. And so the fact that your life's work, in a sense, is committed to all of that is significant. And for people just to recognize Torrance in the context of what it is you're doing just gives a broader sense of the rootedness of that. Ken did study with Torrance there in Edinburgh,
Yes.
so he may
Ken,
simply pass on
when you're
info.
finished with those papers, send them our way. We'd love to have them.
No, I noticed that Andy Purvis, when he wrote a chapter on the Christology of Torrance for of was it JBD or Tom? No, it was for Tom because he dives. He has a spot in his development of Torrance's dogmatics where there's a gap. There's no particular book where uh, Tom had expounded on it. He says, for this, I'm going to have to go to my class papers. Because Marty and I have been comparing notes for some time. I've got two iterations of something he did for keep asking them questions. And he
Yeah.
added a paragraph in the second edition.
Uh-huh.
So they were constantly
Yeah.
being revised.
Yeah.
He wanted them to be current, and fortunately, the college had a secretarial staff who would sit there and dutifully type
Yeah.
every revision he gave them, and then toss out the old ones and bring in the new ones. So it was kept fairly current. And I did take my set of the Christology lectures I heard, or the notes I had, and looked at the printed volume. And the printed volume is far more extensive than the set of notes I had.
Mhm.
And Walker said, I updated this stuff myself here. If I had a later stuff that put a paragraph between these two paragraphs, I put the paragraph in.
Yeah.
And I can see somebody who's carefully trying to edit this stuff and lay out a chronological sequence of the development of his thought. To have somebody later come along with um, uh, a cement mixer and throw them all in and churn them all up and then pour it all out, you lose all that subtlety. So I support you in keeping these frozen in time embryonic ideas as they develop, if you can date them. That's the darndest thing.
Boy, that is the question. So at least we can associate the donor, whether the donor can date them
Yeah,
is usually the case.
yeah. I
Um,
was only there for a year, so I picked up
right.
everything I could see, JBT, TFT, and a couple of others, and just squirreled them away
Right.
with the idea that in my leisure I would read them.
And then it's also of help to be able, if they're dated, as you say, to be able to say, okay, this was the form that not only this donor experienced them, but also who were the classmates at that time. So
Mhm.
the dating really is significant.
Yeah.
This is why I'm after every set I can. Bruce Ritchie has promised to send his our way eventually. And I will say this past November, he also did hand over a letter from TF that he received
Yeah.
that I'm really thrilled to have. And we'll put that on the Torrance website here pretty soon. I just haven't had a chance to do that yet, but
The uh, Charles Hodge, who obviously lectured for nearly 40 years, and the student fraternities, the eating colleges, would have sets of student notes of Hodge's
yeah.
lectures. and so that if you had to miss a class, you could quick run into your Eaton College library, pull out that volume, and read the lectures you had missed,
Yeah.
because it didn't change. Once he wrote the lecture, that's it. It was so you could do that, and there are several copies of Hodges notes from Hodges lectures in the collections of the Presbyterian Historical Society. And the pages go on, 100 pages of nicely written stuff, and then 10 pages of blank. And then the notes start up again. Somebody obviously had to take off and left and meant to go back and copy in the rest, but never did.
Yeah.
So I really love manuscript evidence. And so I commend you for holding on to that stuff.
Well,
Ken is
thank
an
you, Ken.
archivist as well, so he is very into the world of the gathering, sustaining, and getting people to the right information. So
Yeah.
it's
A
a
very,
valuable.
very trivial question on the hexameron, because I came across the note in one of my biographies of Basel that the hexameron was printed in Basel, Switzerland, in the 1560s.
Was it 1560? I can't remember the date. I remember it was 1550s or 60s, but I don't remember the date.
Yeah,
And and that,
Erasmus himself was gathering Greek type in Basel
yeah,
in the
yeah,
1540s in order to put the New Testament into print.
yeah.
So it's like
And
it's
that's the one that was so influential because there was so much rethinking of cosmology going on at that time.
yeah.
Uh, uh,
Well, now I can believe it now that why the printers wanted that text printed, and they had the Greek type to do it.
yeah,
So it went out the door
yeah,
within 20 years of the New Testament itself.
hmm yeah,
Very good. Well, thank you, Kerry. Again, the nature of this, I myself was there because I wanted to do the science of the personal, which everyone in the department as well as everyone else says, what does that mean? But it's a concept that has come from my Torrance and McMurray studies particularly, but Torrance certainly with onto-relational thinking, was saying something that in some ways is missing from the literature. And to go to where you are and to hear the history of science, it was partly attuning to how do we think with Torrance in things that many other people have missed. And so what we're doing, even as we go through this book, is to recognize Torrance is providing a bridge for people to enter into the integrated forms of thinking that engage science, theology in ways that are helpful. And we have to go beyond just what we would think is the beginning of Christian thought, as we are doing today, the Greek Christian mind, to really find what these terms and frames of thought are about. I will probably continually stop and say, I know you know what that word means. How would you translate it for a fifth grader? So you just use the word cosmology, and not every fifth grader knows what cosmology is. So how would you translate that for a fifth grader?
cosmology is one of the most exciting words you're ever going to hear. It's about what the nature of the universe is. There you go. Now,
Good.
for the eighth grader, I'll add a
Yes.
little more. In
Okay.
antiquity, the study of the universe was divided into two sciences, astronomy and cosmology. Astronomy was the mathematics of how things move in the heavens, and cosmology was about what it's made of, what the structure is, everything else we need to understand it. So cosmology was part of physical science and astronomy was part of mathematics. And people tended to be trained in one or the other, not both. And
Hmm.
bringing them together is what happened in that generation or two after Basil's work was published. When you have people like Copernicus saying, I'm a mathematician, but I can do physics better than those physicists. And then Galileo and Descartes and Newton coming along to finish that process, which we could say was the merging of mathematics or the merging of astronomy and cosmology into one new physics.
Very good. We may not be caught up with the second one even yet if we haven't studied science, but we're building the frameworks to understand these things. And why they're all important, and Torrance really wants to see the integration of them because of a whole universe with different perspectives, but there is a holism to it that is easily lost. And when you start breaking things apart, the nature of the fracturing is a fracturing of knowledge as well as our engagement with it.
Yes.
So, in one more large picture statement, in your on your handout, there are three people following the book itself, three people who, in a sense, form the structure of what this first chapter, the Greek Christian mind, looks like. So, most people they put some basil on their food and don't think about basil of Caesarea. And Gregory Nazianzus, I don't know what we do with that. People have heard of the golden mouth John Chrysostom if they've heard anything, but to think of him connected to science, a scientific frame of mind, is not something that they might. Can you give just a one, not more than a one paragraph, but each of these is important for this chapter because they bring this piece of puzzle to the party.
Yeah. You know, we really underestimate, I think, the degree to which cosmology changed as a result of Christian and Hebrew thought in the first centuries after Christ. And the and that's because when we're looking back at Greek culture prior to Christ, we often don't peel away the things that we take for granted and we look at it with our modern filters. So one way it's often put is that um, the the Greek intellectual, but also the artists and other ordinary people might have had a lot of joy in exulting in the beauty of the sea or the mountains or wine and olives or music, drama, dance, etc., the beauty of art. But in the really big things that mattered, it was a dismal, fatalistic cosmology where history is not real. There's just flux, meaningless flux. Things that happen are either by necessity, meaning fate, or by chance, which might be the accidental occasions of fortune. Um, but but there were even the idea of the music of the spheres, that the heavenly spheres are generating a music that we try to intellectually understand through mathematics. And there's beauty there, but it's also a determinism that is passed down because those spheres are that music that they're generating is determining the course of our lives on earth. And all the misfortune and chaos, corruption and sorrow that we experience is part of what is decreed by the fates. And there's no respite, no recourse from it. And until we really get that, I think we underestimate the accomplishment in the first centuries after Christ of primarily the church fathers, but also some important Hebrew writers that that evangelized the Hellenistic mind, as Torrance would put it. And suddenly the music of the spheres became a song of love and a real dance in which we participate because that iron necessity was broken. And now the spirit is freely moving and redeeming us. And we see that in these three thinkers and their emphasis on contingent order, on the intimate nature of providence. It's not just providence and general laws. It's God cares about each one of us intimately. He knows us. That was inconceivable to the Greek mind prior to the reformation of intellectual culture by early Christians, and other aspects that he brings out. But those two, particular providence, as later Puritans would put it, and not general providence, but particular specific providence, and contingent order and contingent history. These are represent a complete reconstruction of intellectual culture that very, very quickly the magnitude of what was achieved was forgotten. But what was achieved was a deliverance from despair.
So when he begins his first sentence of the Greek Christian mind, I should like to take one principal theme from the teachings of three great doctors of the church. What is the one theme? What should be downloaded in one's head that is the one great theme?
Um, that's a great question.
Thank you.
It might even be grace, because all of this could be subsumed under that word. That I mean, I'd want to start not with creation, but with incarnation,
Mm-hmm.
and that is above all a revelation of God's free grace, and that includes the whole idea that there is neither necessity nor chance. So it's got the contingent order, but it's also got that intimate relation of particular providence. So that God is in relationship with us through his own initiative in such an um, incredible reconstruction of existence into the new creation through the life, death, resurrection, and ascension of Christ. Nothing less than a new creation based on the divine freedom to love. Maybe grace is the one word
Mm.
that can summarize that, if we recognize grace as being in dynamic, saving relationship
Yeah.
with Christ, not as some commodity that we can bottle and sell.
The
You know,
actuality of grace in the
yeah.
incarnation. And your first point, your first sentence after you put the title is Athanasius. So you've got another layer behind, in a sense, that's also here. So of course we know that for
Torrance
Torrance,
can't write
he's
without mentioning Athanasius.
yeah. So just set his part in the jewel or the crown here. What is the part that Athanasius is going to play in this introduction of grace, which is the
Um,
first word in the subchapter, Saint Basil of Caesarea, grace, man, and reason. So grace is probably appropriate, but what is it that we want to understand Athanasius is showing up for this party?
yeah, so um, this quote that I've got on the handout, it was the incarnation of the Son or Word of God that provided the central and controlling point for Christian understanding of creation, not just redemption. Um, that fits with the line that Torrance quotes in many of his other works, like Trinitarian Faith, that it's more devout and more godly to know God as Father than to know him as the originator or creator. And so one way of putting this would be, um, when we have the revelation of God in Christ and the resulting understanding of God as a triune communion of Father, Son, and Spirit, we no longer approach creation without Christ. We're no longer deists in a modern sense, or Unitarians in our actual thinking of creation and living out of the meaning of creation. Still less pagan Greeks. But the creation is liberated because we're approaching it with the Christ spectacles that Calvin later used that image. And that by itself is a radical reconstruction even of evangelical Christian thought in the last 50 years or last century. I remember when I was um, still in my 20s at least, after pouring myself into the doctrine of creation to try to understand it as well as I could, through science and through Bible study and through my theological reading, I finally came to a personal resolution that I summarized to myself as no creation without Christ. I no longer want to think about anything in creation without adopting the lens of Christ. And that's straight out of Athanasius, and Torrance helped me to see why that intuition I had kind of blundered into has such a deep and profound significance in the Nicene tradition. It's a Trinitarian approach to creation that we need. It will save us from being really functional pagans or functional Unitarians.
Yeah.
One way to put this, if I want to be really provocative,
Yes.
is that from my dear Reformed brothers and sisters, from whom I've learned so much and who I I I I, I I appreciate so much. I learned to think in terms of the emphasis is on doctrines don't just mean something in systematic theology, they also affect the way we see the world. And so the whole idea of a Christian worldview and a way to construct that Christian worldview is through the progression of creation, fall, and redemption. And if we can learn to see that pattern in everything, we will be better able to uh, really think through the connection between our faith and our life.
Mm.
And that is a scheme that has really been important in the Kuyperian and Neo-Calvinian traditions of Reformed theology, and it's quite helpful on its own. But over the years, I've become so much more convinced that to take a Christological lens is much more satisfying and effective for me in this process of connecting faith to life and a Christian, bringing a Trinitarian lens to creation, among other topics. And that means crucifixion, resurrection, especially, but life, crucifixion, resurrection, ascension. If I can start with what that is in Christ and come with a Christological perspective, it gives me a much more nuanced and profound understanding of creation, the suffering of creation, the way we're headed toward a new creation. There are all kinds of ways, but I think that's a more that perspective is more true to what Torrance is saying in this opening sentence and what Athanasius said. Let's begin with God as Father rather than with God as the self-existent or the original source. Start with who we know God to be in Jesus and then in the Trinity.
Mhm. I have a friend who he wrote a book. He begins it's titled "I Was Born in a Box," and he just suggests all of his education, the culture around him, everything was boxed. And so he was told, you got that class is a box on math, and that is a box is a on music, and that's each one of them was just a box. And he said he came to realize that that is not the nature of the real world. He was born in a box, but you can't stay in a box. And so when you talk about the nature of the movement towards a Christological view, there comes a point where just knowing about Jesus based on the witness of others can become very box like, putting the aspects in a different box. But to meet the person is kind of the point. And many of my students often they want to talk about Jesus as a model or example for moral behavior or for a payment for something, but it's like, yes, but have you met the person? And so to say the Christian frame of mind at some level here is to not be reduced merely to the human thoughts and categories that we project on the world, but to allow the reality of God incarnate to come and do a work that engages us. In fact, even today, here and now. That there is the dimension of the personal that we so easily lose in what scientific thinking might be. But as you've traced the history of science, as Polanyi would say, all knowledge is personal knowledge, and that is true of science as well.
Hmm.
So the Greek Christian frame of mind, as we're going to be looking at it here, is able to be transformed because it doesn't allow the boxes to continue to force the conversation in a direction for more boxes, but actually is an opening up to reality. Is that fair enough?
Absolutely. Yeah. I love Aristotle. His two volume complete works is always near, and um, I I've spent so much time uh, tracing out how he started these interesting conversations that continue all the way up through the 20th century, and 21st probably, but I study the past, so um, but I just ache for him because of the box of being in a position where he could imagine that only those things which are necessary can be known. And if something is not rationally necessary, logically necessary, then it is not an object of knowledge. There's no knowledge that can be had of it. It's just that meaningless flux or irrational chance. And so when he comes, for example, to write his meteorology, he just says this is a field in which so much happens by chance that our knowledge is going to be relatively restricted. It's not as great as we would hope. But here's what we can know. And of course, it's one of my favorite books, actually, is his meteorology. But you really see the play out of this polarity of chance and necessity at work, and it clamps down on investigation and curiosity and wonder, and um, and the liberation from that happened because of the incarnation. All of a sudden, you have an event that is not by necessity. And it's not, typically if something is by necessity, it's always and everywhere. And you can't get more particular, more singular than the incarnation. And yet it's infinitely intelligible. We will never get to the bottom of the intelligibility of the mystery of the incarnation. The last word on that can never be said. We can always ponder it in the meat and never exhaust its meaning. So the incarnation means that this polarity of chance and necessity is exploded. It doesn't work. The incarnation is not by chance, it's not by necessity. It, and so we've got to have a different way of thinking. So to really throw off that way of thinking of chance and necessity is revolutionary. And it's difficult even today unless we pause and think profoundly on the incarnation. We don't succeed in reconstructing this aspect of our minds. It's still in the water, culturally speaking. And and yet everything changes if we can reconstruct the intellectual climate we live in. And one of the key examples he gives in this chapter is providence. To feel that God is not watching us from a distance, but he's intimately acquainted with each of us. That's part of this reconstruction of the mind, evangelizing of the mind in a cultural sense, freeing us from these boxes, like the box of necessity.
So your second point within your first section, you have a quote from Basel and ask, what are the ramifications of the following statement? Which it introduces the words that below the key terms all I think appear within the statement. So I'm just going to read it and then reflect on that. Essential to Basel's cosmological outlook lies the Christian concept of the radical contingence of the universe. So contingence is a key thing, and its rational order. Essential to all that is the conception, so impossible for the Greeks, of the contingent nature of the human mind created by God out of nothing, but given a unique relation to his own transcendent mind through grace.
There's that
The
word grace again.
incorporation, grace again, yes, the incorporation of those ideas in Basil's Hexameron played, which I had not heard of really before, so we need to hear about that, played out a very important role, not only in challenging the intellectual foundations of the classical outlook upon the world of visible and invisible reality, but in helping to transform the Greek mind in a way that has left its mark upon the very basis of Western culture, end quote. And I assume that still goes on today.
Oh man, yes, that's it. Like any reformation, the church is reformed, always reforming. We still need to reform ourselves. And oh, I love this quote from Torrance. It's part of what first lit my fire to learn from Torrance and the deep heritage that intellectual legacy that I feel he gifted me. He gave me eyes to see this in my studies in the history of science. So this
So let
harps
me
on,
let
this
me
connects
stab it.
with, yeah, go
Go
ahead.
ahead. I was going to say, if we just stab at a few of the ideas to keep unpacking them, radical contingents can seem theoretical and abstract, but it's to say everything that happens, there is a purpose in one thing that causes other things to happen that is not chance or a necessity. There is a purposefulness in it. Is that a fair echo? And that purposefulness is the making space for what theological science wants to do.
Yeah, I think the only tweak to that I would make is to emphasize it can become intelligible. And the reason I say that is because purpose can be used with all kinds of baggage that might not be involved. So for say Aristotle or take any of the early Greeks, um, th- something is by necessity if it's everywhere and always, and it's logically necessary, and we can think it through because our reason will be able to grasp that it is necessary. And that's contested by that bit about the contingent nature of the human mind. That breaks that logical chain. We can no longer find our way through logic to the way things must necessarily be. And then contingency for the Greeks or chance is unintelligible because it's not logical or rationally necessary. And we observe it to be irregular. And the extreme form of that is only once. So, so as Christians, the word chance gets changed into contingent order, which is neither of those, even though to many, they're going to hear us say contingent and they're going to think, oh, that's chance. But contingent order is rejecting both chance and necessity. And it's saying it could have been otherwise, and therefore it's not necessary. It could have been otherwise. And yet it's intelligible, and therefore it's not what they meant by chance. So intelligible, eventually meaningful or purposeful, depending on how you define it. So, for example, the Christian practice of as the Puritans urged us to constantly contemplate the unpredictable aspects of our own life story and learn to see in the events of our own lives that might have been inscrutable at the time. We might not have seen a purpose in all the things that happened, and we don't even have to say they had a good purpose. That would go beyond. But at least in retrospect, we can make we can find that God has made them intelligible and He's brought meaning out of them. That God can turn everything for good.
God works all
So,
things together for good. Yeah.
right, even the things that came out of the blue that were by no means necessary. Oftentimes, our lives turn on unpredictable, small little chance events, and now we've got a word for that: contingent events that might have been otherwise. But oh my goodness, we're able to give thanks because we see that they're intelligible. And and so this is a whole different world than the world of iron necessity and despair of antiquity. So does that help?
It does. It does. The book, the Basil's Hexameron, what was that book saying, and what was the contribution of it? Because I really
Okay,
didn't.
so yeah, so the hexameral tradition, if we want to put it that way, is the tradition of commentaries on Genesis chapter 1, and it really means the 6 days, commentaries
Okay.
on the 6 days. And what's so cool is that you can take imagine the 6 days as a skeleton. There are bones. You can hang anything you want to talk about with the natural world. You can find a place to talk about it in a commentary on the 6 days. So hexamera frequently are journeys through all of creation, the world below, the heavens above, everything in them all. And sometimes hexameral will be multi-volume scientific works. So we've got, I mean, I have read probably, I don't know, maybe 100, maybe more hexameral commentaries through history. It's one of the most common genres of scientific writing until the 18th century when you started to see the differentiation of scientific disciplines. A perfect example is geology. Geology became differentiated around 1800, and that's when the term came into use. But there's a work published in English um, in the 16, I don't know, 1670 maybe, contemporary with Newton, so last part of the 1600s by an English bishop, and it's a hexameral commentary, but its title is Geologia, one of the earliest uses of the word geology or its cognates in English. But it's a hexameral commentary because it was in the hexameral commentaries, day three, the separation of the seas from the dry land, that everyone would talk about their understanding of the water cycle and the understanding of mountains and how the mountains formed and how they're essential to the water cycle. So plug in any topic in science. Geology would go in day three, but every other discipline would go in some other day. And until there was a specific um, discipline for those works to be published in, you go to them to find, you go to the hexameral commentaries to find what people knew. So, so
So
it'd be
that
very
reminds me.
short-sighted, as so many
Yeah.
people say, that nobody wrote about geology until around 1800. Well, yeah, they did. Go read a hexameral commentary. There's
Yeah.
it's a topic all the way through. Now, Basil's hexameron was immediately translated into Latin, and so it had tremendous influence on the science of the Latin Middle Ages, not to mention Ambrose and Augustine. But it was also translated into Syriac and from there into Arabic, and it had a tremendous influence in Islamic science, some of which came over then and influenced European science later. So Basil's Hexameron is one of the fundamental ancient works of science, no doubt about it.
So for the Christian
Oh,
frame of
Bill,
mind,
Yeah.
Bill's got a
Bill's
question.
got.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So Hexameron is a genre.
Yeah.
Okay. Basil's Hexameron. What's the name of his book?
Oh, that's what it's called. Six
Oh,
days is what that means. Yeah, literally it means 6 days. So it's a
Yes.
commentary
Yeah.
on the 6 days.
I read your link.
Yeah.
And Wikipedia is very helpful too.
Oh, good.
Excuse the expression, Wikipedia.
And I do want to
Oh,
point people to the links that are there. There's a very nice video in one case and a
Right.
lot of good information as well. So those are really helpful
well,
further up.
well, yeah, let me just say, Basil is one of the people that Torrance loved that ought to turn up in a history of science survey course. So if you're curious, uh, the course is an undergraduate course, History of Science from the beginning to Newton. So if you want to see how undergraduates here at OU would encounter Basil in such a course, and at the very bottom, the Christian frame of mind is one of the sources I'm recommending people take a look at. And I quote this very quote, I think, in this page. But anyway, this is my quote lecture, but it's not a lecture. They read it and then we talk about it afterwards. Um, so So anyway, you can see how Basil fits into a general history of science course. If you want to, if you're interested, if you want to follow these links.
So, for the purpose of the Greek Christian mind, to say the work of this genre of literature organized the nature of science around God's creation in the biblical narrative that's going on, and contemporary scientists don't necessarily look at the big picture of science. They have their specialty, and they may or may not look. I mean, if they're a biologist, they may not look at the stars or geology. They become so focused, in a sense, they are fragmented out of the broader picture of what science might be, in a way that these works held it together and gave a frame of mind with a contingency on God as being the one who gave the will to create the diversity of what's there.
Marty, this is brilliant. So you've just hit on some of the features of the hexameral tradition that makes them so interesting to me and why I've devoted so much time to reading them. So, as you have said, as you've surmised, I'd absolutely affirm it that the hexameral tradition keeps the different disciplines in conversation with each other. So that is really an important feature of them. A second point is that it keeps them in conversation with each other without requiring them to be logically linked. They're not rationally linked together as if you make an innovation in one area, you have to get it okayed by some other area first. That's the tight interlinkage of disciplines that was such a catastrophe when Galileo wanted to change a little bit about physics. And it was seen to be, you can't do that because so much else is involved. So how do you have the kinds of relations between scientific disciplines that allow each to develop cataphysin to their own area without these imperialistic, inappropriate, this discipline dictating to another? Well, a hexameral commentary keeps them in conversation, in juxtaposition, but without one being given permission to have a domineering relationship over another. So there's two reasons. And then the third one I'll just throw out is that the idiom of Genesis 1 is temporal. So whether people are talking about it or not, the whole idea that there's a 6-day sequence, even if the sequence is not actually stated to be chronological, it is a framework that has built into it this idea of sequence. And that very idiom helped spread the idea that contingent order is also contingent history, that we cannot study nature as a being that is static, but nature is a creation that therefore has a history like we do. And the idiom of the days was very conducive to giving people a way to talk about nature having a history of development that is, again, not a strictly logical development, but more the kind of development like our own life history with contingent events that cannot be predicted from causes, but must be reconstructed looking backwards, like we reconstruct the meaning of our own lives. And so the hexameral tradition, I submit, is also really significant for the development of the historical sciences. And I've actually published several articles on this if you're interested in deep dives, and published another article on the hexameral tradition and biblical interpretation and cosmology. So if you're interested in those, I can forward those to you at some
So,
point.
specifically wondering about the sixth and the seventh day. The sixth day, I mean, that would be where anthropology arises, and it would be a theological anthropology, the human being created in the image of God. Was that a tradition that continued, that the human was seen as a 6-day creature? And then the question, what happened to the seventh day? Why six? Why not include science as a function of the seventh day as well? A
Yeah,
reflection on and participation in.
right. So, of course, every commentator is welcome to take up just those kinds of questions if they wish. So there's no standard format of you must include these things.
Yeah.
You could be selective, but a lot of people, by the time they'd write a hexameral commentary, they've studied a wide variety of sciences, including theological science, and they want to be able to create this encyclopedic um, panorama of knowledge. So they would address theological questions like that. But even that requires them to comment on whether they interpret the days in some kind of chronological sequence or just a thematic sequence. By far the most common approach is the quote framework hypothesis, as it's often called now, but you find it in Thomas Aquinas and countless others. And that's that you have the forming and filling. The first 3 days are the forming of these places, and the second cycle of 3 days takes each place formed and fills it. So that's a thematic approach rather than a strictly chronological one. But nevertheless, um, there were various ways they could turn it to be temporal. Augustine's is maybe the most famous. He thought everything was created all at once in an instant, and that's got a quote from Ecclesiasticus to support it. But then he thought that it unfolds over time. Many people adopted that way of thinking, but others found the idiom of 6 days to be a, a pleasantly ambiguous and to allow temporal development. So alchemists, for example, from the centuries of the church fathers on into Newton's era, took the liberties of interpreting Genesis 1 sequentially over time. And I'm not meaning literal 24 hours. To them, alchemy takes long periods but the alchemist was trying to reproduce in the lab the same processes that God had used over time as related in the 6 days to create the world.
Not
And so it was
unlike
a
the use of the word
spiritual
evolution.
reenactment. Pardon?
It's kind of like the modern use of the word evolution. It is the
Right,
transformation over time. Yeah,
right.
theistic evolution.
Yeah. And and meteorology was often used in the same way as a form of development. And the 6 days seem to be giving an impetus to those ways of thinking. So the hexameral tradition encouraged pursuit of every science, kept them in conversation, but not logically necessary conversation, not scientism in the sense of the imposition of one science over another, but in conversation, and then provided a place for discussing what is what is entailed by nature being a creature like us, and therefore the question, does it have a history, and if so, what is that like? All those things are carried by the hexameral tradition. And then I guess a fourth thing that's really important is that Stoic cosmology was based on recurring cycles where you start off with a watery universe, the water gets used up, and then there's a final conflagration, and then the thing happens all over again. So you've got development in a linear way, and then you've got a cycle that comes back and repeats it all. And that prior to the Christian reconstruction of Hellenistic thought was a very necessitarian thing, like reincarnation, very much caught in the iron wheel of fortune and despair. But with people like Basel, that Stoic perception gets separated from the endless cycles, and you're left with the linear development. And and so the iron necessity is dropped, but the development remains. And the hexameral tradition, partly including Basel but not limited to him, became a major source for discussions of Stoic cosmology, which are found in people like Descartes and Newton, and and also the Stoics insisted that there is a purpose. And now we can go to that word, Marty. There is a purpose to everything. And so the Stoics, contrary to Aristotle, insisted that even singular and rare events are intelligible. So so yeah, Stoic stowaways is what I call it.
Hmm.
Stoic
Through
stowaways.
Basel and other hexameral commentaries, lots of Stoic ideas were appropriated and
Yeah.
put into a Christian context in relation to Genesis 1.
So to bring the title of this first section on Basel into the purpose of Torrance's writing this chapter, God by his grace creates the world and humans within it, gives them the reason to recognize the orderliness of creation by which the first chapter of Genesis gives us, and to recognize that all of creation has been made contingently. Reason reflects upon that reason, so that humans find themselves under God's creative work, and that at some level is the reception of God's grace that provides the meaning, the intention. When I use the word purpose, I was thinking John McMurray. Every act has an intention
Yeah,
that
yeah.
gives it its purpose. So it would be that personal sense of intention. Therefore, Basel brings together these dimensions in forms of thought through his writings that organize what the scientific work would do as a following after Katapuzin God's creative purposes. Is that a fair?
Hmm.
I'm trying to get the frame of mind, how we maintain the frame of mind that Basel brings to us. So that's kind of what I heard in a nutshell.
Yeah, yeah. Let me also mention the contingent nature of the human mind, to go back to that one again,
Okay.
that our rationality can enable us to discover the intelligibility of the universe, but it's not through necessary reasoning. So there is this gift of grace that we are attuned to the universe and it
Mhm.
can be intelligible to us. One common way of putting it is there is a harmony between the way we think and the way the universe is made so that we can go discover it. Having that confidence to discover the rationality or the logos, lowercase l, of the natural order. Having that confidence is part of this, but it's a confidence that is tempered by the humility that it's not just through logic and reason that we do it. We also have to bring in sense experience and empirical methods, but the universe will turn out to be intelligible. And that's an incredible legacy
Yeah,
here as well.
yeah. Which I'm just remembering Torrance's lecture that he gave at the conference you went to. The three elements of science: that you must believe in reality, you must believe that it's orderly, and you must believe it's intelligible. And that's your third move there. That what is orderly can also be described, understood within its contingent upon the nature of what God has done.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to move you over to the second side of your page to Gregory
Oh,
Nazianzus.
can
Oh,
I
you
give you
want?
the answers to the true or false
Oh,
questions real quick?
absolutely, absolutely. I'm sorry.
Those are from my lecture. So these are actual questions. I give the students the questions ahead of time. They encounter
Yeah.
them on a quiz,
And do
but
they get them right?
well, there's no reason why they wouldn't get 100%, but it's amazing. It's astonishing to me that they don't always get them right. So the so-called hexameral literature consisted of incantations and spells. No, it's the 6 days is what it means, not hexes. For
Huh.
monotheists such as Basil or Basel, the contingency of nature implied that natural laws are not necessary but might have been different. Yes, that's right. Um, God could have made a universe with different natural laws. Basel argued that water might exist beyond the sublunar regions. See, that's something contrary to Aristotle. But he said, yeah, it can happen. And
Yeah.
man, that meant by the time you get to the early modern period, well, by 1277, you've got natural philosophers in Paris, among other places, saying that there can be other Earth-like planets with water on them. There can also be other universes. God was free to make the universe in such a way, and we need to make sure that we're not interpreting natural law as being so necessary that it would prohibit divine freedom to make other worlds.
Yeah.
So anyway, Basel regarded a spinning top as an example of violent rather than natural motion. No, he thought it was natural, and that's a critique of Aristotle's physics that led to the modern idea of inertia, as I said earlier. Philoponus refuted a mathematical formulation of Aristotelian physics by dropping objects of different weights from a tall tower. That's true. Most people would put Galileo in there instead of Philoponus. Galileo did not do it at the Leaning Tower of Pisa. John Philoponus had already done it in Athens in the 6th century. So the theory of motion of Philoponus provided a foundation. Yes. Basil's hospital. Yes, he opened. He's important for the history of medicine, not only for aid during a famous famine, but also for opening the earliest known hospital open for a significant amount of time that was not just for wealthy people, open to anyone where health care would be provided free. Ordinary people could go for health care uh, in this monastic community. And that then became a model for monastic movements throughout the Middle Ages to be hospitals for ordinary peasants in neighboring villages. Anyone could seek health care at a monastery. So
And is
that's
that a
a
6 day? Is that a 6 day issue? Is the
no,
6 day seen as a day of medicine? No.
I don't. Well, it's linked in this that it was believed that whatever illnesses would arise, that God would have proleptically, in light of those diseases that would come to pass, he would have pre-stocked the creation with potential cures. So it was a divinely appointed vocation to go and try to search out what those cures might be. So the physician was called to this theologically mandated task of searching for the seeds, so to speak, that God had put into the earth to treat any disease.
The ethical imperative comes from Jesus' own words.
Yeah.
When Basil set up his monastic order, he and Gregory went through the Jesus' words. And if Jesus said to do it, they did it. And so heal the sick, feed the hungry, clothe the naked. These were divine imperatives, and he did everything he could to make it happen. And it was very common in the first 400, 500 years for the church to say it's a disgrace for anyone to starve to death in a Christian city.
Ken, thank you so much. Yes, no creation without Christ. We don't want to do the 6 days without Christ. Yeah.
It
And
is a place where people experience science more than just about anywhere else with doctors and brushing your teeth. I mean, it's all part of the science of the care of the human, which has largely been distanced from the nature of particularly theology, though I say the best scientific discipline that we need to learn from is dentistry, because they learn every day to teach people to take care of their health in a particular area. And the church has not done a very good job of that. And there's much to be learned there. Relational hygiene.
here. Okay, backside of the handout.
Yep, we're on the backside now.
Gregory.
So tell us about Gregory and assumption and redemption
Yeah.
and the
Well,
human.
I'm sure you've all talked about the unassumed as the unhealed before. That is a line that Torrance quoted often. Gregory is not the first one to use it, nor the last. And uh, part of that, of course, again, goes to the heart of the incarnation, that the flesh that Jesus assumed, the eternal Son of God assumed flesh that is ours and sanctified it and redeemed it and healed it. And if he assumed it, he healed it. If it wasn't assumed, it's not healed. And this plays into the discussion of the mind, because if you have that necessitarian filter we've been talking about, like the ancient Greeks, then the mind, through logic and reason, should be able to make a bridge to that necessary Excuse me. I always get a dry throat when talking. Cough drop. That that logical bridge to the way things are. But if our minds are also a contingent reality, then we need them to be reconstructed. And in the incarnation, there is an assumption of that our creaturely rationality and a healing of human rationality so that we can now begin to to be both confident in the rational faculties we've been given while not setting aside the humility that comes from knowing that it's a contingent creaturely form of rationality. So this phrase, so important in so many aspects of theology, it really does apply to the question of the reconstruction of the mind on a Christ-centered basis. And
So
maybe someone else would like to comment on this.
the metanoia or change of mind is from a point of view of the human in a naturalistic kind of way that is all necessity and chance to seeing contingency. Is that the transformation of the mind that's happening there?
Yeah, I think that's a good start, and then it goes on from there, from glory to glory. Um, you know, he's thinking about, as he puts it, the deep-seated coordination between theological and natural science. That takes some major thinking, some major work. But just like Ken said, it also takes action. And so neither Torrance nor any of these three Greek fathers would want us to just become thinkers without the action also. As we are coming to know something, we grow immediately in an ethical dimension to to work that out. And it's not just us evangelizing our own minds as individuals, but it's a culture as well. We're changing the culture so that there are far-reaching manifestations, in this case of the release from despair, of the necessity of fortune and fate, but also in other ways. That I wouldn't limit it to that. That's a good example, but not the only.
For me and the work that I do, both with McMurray, but also the question
Yeah.
with translating into the world of psychology, to say that we are born with fearful brains. We think out of fear. Am I going to survive? What am I going to lose? Fear and caution is what eating the tree of knowledge of good and evil. That now you can judge between good and evil, and generally, what would be evil is our first inclination. I want to avoid the evil. The capacity to love, to have our minds oriented around living from love, the metanoia of the mind in the that comes to us as we're addressed by the God who loves us, accepts us, relieves us from the fear of rejection, all that. To say there is something there that is it's a radical transformation from the natural state of the human mind in its amygdala dominates to something else that gives a kind of wisdom that we call of the frame of mind and the wisdom of God and the person of Christ. So Jesus coming and showing us in embodied personhood what it looks like to actually live the life of love and to invite us into that. I'm wondering if there's any sense of the assumption and the transformation of an orientation that goes to that kind of a level.
Oh, I do love that. Yeah. And our word habit comes from developing an orientation to our thinking,
Mm-hmm.
so just, and that fits. I put a note here about two works of Torrance's that I think are relevant here. Christian Theological Instinct is an audio lecture, a short one. Used to be available from Regent Audio, so now it's offline until they get things compliant with Canadian privacy laws. But if you can come up with that recording. It's one of my favorite sermons by Torrance, and I listen to it periodically just to make sure I still have it internalized. And a an epilogue to one of the Walker books we were talking about earlier is called The Reconciliation of Mind. And that is a printed version of a portion of the Christian Theological Instinct lecture. And one of the examples that Torrance gives in both of these and elsewhere is the example of a pianist. He knew a concert pianist who who whose hand muscles were so developed from a lifetime of playing the piano that he sadly had to inform someone who wanted to pursue the piano but was starting too late. No, your hands are in your life, your hands won't be able to develop the kind of musculature necessary to do this. You're just starting too late. And and that adaptation of physical adaptation of the hands to the task of playing the piano, Torrance offered as an analogy to the development of the cast of mind where we've reconstructed our mind. So he's not saying you just remember in your mind this argument with a premise and a second premise, and it's not a syllogism you memorize. It's something far deeper. An
Yeah.
example might be coming to believe that slavery is wrong. That didn't happen by proof texting the Bible. That happened through a century or more of theological reflection that changed the cast of our minds.
Mm.
And of course, we believe that's the teaching of the Bible, but we didn't get there by proof texting. We had to get there by a deep reconstruction of the mind. And the same kind of reconstruction, not proof texting, is what we need in this deep level coordination between theological and science and natural science.
Yeah. I do an exercise in my classes where I just have a person turn to the person next to them and say, "I'm not afraid of you." It's a true statement, right? And people do it and say, "Did that feel true?" And they'll say, "Yes." I say, now tell that person what you think or feel about yourself. And so I give them a moment to do that. I say, was that as easy as to say at first? And sometimes, yeah, that wasn't too bad. Then tell that person what you think or feel about them. And then we talk about that and the difficulty of it. And then tell them what you think they think or feel about you. This is, of course, recursion, but it's also what I say, it's the basics of a relationship, your ability to tell people who you are, to be able to tell them who you think they are, and then what you think they think. We relate to what we think people think about us. If we think they like us, that's how we relate. They are the elements of a personal relationship, but people through that course generally say, I have come to discover that I have a lot of fear about getting those things wrong. It seems as though I'm not afraid of you, when in reality, anything that has to do with being personal, there's a lot of fear in there.
Yeah.
And the question I've had sometimes asked, can you tell that person your deepest, darkest sin? Just in case you're not convinced. And people generally at that point get, I do have a lot of fear. I don't want to be known at that level. I'm afraid of the judgment. And so there is a transformation of the mind, as you were describing it, that can happen within a few minutes, really. And it says, when the love of Christ compels us, we are no longer, it's a perfect love that casts out fear. And I think that's part of the transformation of the redemption of Christ, is that we no longer live in a world of performance and all of those things that would say, am I enough? Am I doing it right? To the unconditional grace that transforms our mind.
Yay.
So anyway, that's just
Tom, in his book, The School of Faith, writes a 50-page introduction about catechisms. This is one of the tools of our ancestors was to teach children, sometimes before they know what the words mean, but he teaches them the words, so that when the time comes when you need to have words, you've got a vocabulary you can pick up and use. And you can only do that in a schooled environment. All of the early church fathers were set up schools and even monasteries so that this rehabilitation of the mind could go forward in a charitable place. It was easily abused, I'm sorry to say, but the point was everybody agreed repetition and mutual forbearance and correction was part of the ongoing discipline where we together kind of get there. And the first thing Luther realized when they went out and surveyed the churches around Wittenberg is they were going to have to set up schools. Good God, were they going to have to set up schools? And they would need a catechism and they would need a confession of faith, the basic tools. How to evangelize the mind, and part of it is put in the work to get short, concise statements that you can give to people so that when the occasion comes, they can use them. We still use the confessions of faith every week in our worship services so that traditional language can get out there and people will realize that word has a meaning. And it's not the meaning that I hear on my TV set or in my debates over there. It has a different meaning, and I need to attend to that. And I'll check with my fellow believers what that means. Scientific.
So if I'm hearing Gregory Nazianzus, his assumption of humanity is that he was no longer an outside theoretical giver of some kind of truth. He fully entered into the human experience so that we would encounter God himself engaging us, speaking to us, transforming us through word and deed, so that in that interaction, our minds are transformed because of the one who has come and transformed us in the encounter. Encounter is Barth's word, not Torrance's, but is that fair?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
And the anti-Arian thrust of the whole idea, the whole objection of the Cappadocians to the Arians was the Arians kept saying, God has given us a set of truths. Here they are. Read them. Do that. And here's an example of how to do it. There's Jesus. All external, all legal, all formal. It had no ability to help correct the behaviors that needed to be fixed. And just the example of that, you can be very proud that you had managed to memorize the entire catechism and had learned nothing about your own prideful self, no humility. The whole idea that Jesus himself entered into our lives with the minds we have, healing them as he came, knowing what we're tempted with, and addressing himself to that, to the whole healing of the whole person. The Arians simply hadn't a clue. And by the time Gregory and Basil are writing, they've had 50 years of almost all Arian emperors who were not encouraging this kind of careful thinking. So they had to pretty well step outside the box and framework of the empire to think anew and then come back and evangelize.
It sounds almost Polanyian that Christ's incarnation was the indwelling of humanity so that we could indwell him and our mind would be transformed in that encounter. Is that?
Yeah.
And yet I find that so many pious people scruple exactly on this point. If you say when Jesus took on our humanity, he took on all our humanity. The first thing you do is, oh, not that. Oh, he has to stay meek and mild and pure, or he can't be a savior. And I go, no, he has to enter into your pride and heal it, and your vulgarity and heal that, and the corruption of this world and heal that, or he cannot save you. There's a very thick wall of resistance in conventional Christian piety, but that takes us too far afield. But yay for Gregory for saying it so succinctly.
One
Um,
question on your resources. If we were to find an audio form of the theological Christian theological instinct, what are the copyright rules on it in that it's no longer available?
I don't know, but I think you can find it because I can send it to you.
Yeah, I think I have a copy, but I'm not sure where it
Okay.
is. So
If you
the
don't, let me
question,
know.
the question, do you have it in digital or just
Yeah.
in on the, yeah,
Oh,
okay.
digital, yeah.
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 I want to work with integrity within what's possible, but also to make possible what otherwise is kept out of the conversation. So,
One thing I would say is that when Regent gets their audio library back online, then anyone who has enjoyed it prior to that time could buy it.
mhm,
And then you'd be doing the ethical thing toward Regent.
yeah. I think I bought everything I could that was Torrance oriented, which most of them were videos. I can't remember what all was
Yeah.
in audio.
Well, I bet you got it. It's
Yeah,
fantastic. But let me know if you don't have it.
yeah. So going to point three, then we've got two of the reframing of the Christian mind. So John Chrysostom, tell us about John, the Golden Tongue.
Yes, golden tongued, and I'm glad that he repeated in here the prayer of Chrysostom that is used so frequently in liturgy. Candace and I begin each morning with Book of
Mm,
Morning Prayer and recite that.
mm,
Uh, but but also it's great what he brought out, and of course he's still talking about that theme of contingent order here that we've already gone over.
okay.
But I think it's one of the most important aspects of it is again not to be understood as a synonym for chance. Contingency for a Christian is not chance. It's, or if we, doesn't matter what word we use, the understanding we have is that it's not um, meaningless. Um, and so here's just a small example. Many of you might be familiar with Malcolm Guite, the poet and Anglican priest, and he has a YouTube series called Spell in the Library. And every one of them begins with probably his wife or someone knocking on the door to his study, and then you hear him saying from within, "Come in, come in," and the door opens and you come in, and in the view, and it's like you're walking in to be with him, and he welcomes you to sit down and have a 5-minute chat. Well, the reason he begins them that way is because when he was a chaplain at Girton College, Cambridge, he made a personal resolution that no matter how deeply immersed in a particular task, say writing or preparing a lecture or whatever it was that he was working on, no matter how engrossed, he would welcome every interruption
Mm,
as being God ordained. And that was the way he would understand his call as a university chaplain. Whenever anyone knocks on my door, without hesitation, no matter how deeply involved I am, I'm going to say, "Come in, come in." And so he carries that over now into this YouTube series. He's retired, so, but I love that. He developed that habit of welcoming what might appear to be by chance, somebody knocking on your door at the most inconvenient moment, and yet you respond in a way, this is not by chance. This is, as the world would understand, this is meaningful. And the Christian word for this then is providence. And providence is a word that I think instead of design, we should always ask, should I be using the word providence instead? So providence is the quote that he has here, um, a hitherto unheard of intimacy in which God is believed to care intensely for each person and all that happens to him or her in life and death. So Malcolm was implementing that by this habit he developed of come in, before he could even think of it or mutter, darn. He would say that. Well, this is providence. It's far more than the mere idea of design. And and providence is what comes from this breaking of the cast of mind of chance and necessity. If we're really reconstructing our minds around contingent order, then providence is going to come alive for us and be a much richer category of thought.
Carl Barth replaced the word providence with accompaniment.
Ah,
Providence, pro video, is one step removed, looking, overseeing, whereas
mhm.
accompanying to company is to eat bread with. It is to move into the space in all the kinds of caring ways that you're talking about. And I love
I
that image.
I love that point too, Marty. That's very helpful because by the 19th century, providence was restricted to general providence, the same as natural law. And this older idea of singular or particular providence was pretty hard to find in 19th century usages of it. And so now we do need a different word, maybe, or at least we need to comment on it. We don't mean just the general trend of things.
Yeah,
What we mean is this particular sense of accompaniment, the
yeah,
opposite of God watching us from a distance.
yeah. The discovery we are the children of the Father every moment,
Yeah,
to discover that Jesus is our brother every moment, that we go with him, in him, through him.
yeah,
St. Patrick's poem, of course, is beautiful in that. And that the Spirit is the one who brings our accompaniment into the hearing, the knowing, being known. In a sense, it's a triune accompaniment, not to be lost in any aspect.
yeah, love it.
So Christensen, yeah, I always hear about his preaching. So the scriptural mind, is that related to his preaching? Did he preach in such a way that he was transforming the nature of how we are, how we think from scripture in a way that brings us, and again, the economy of God, the word economy comes from the care of the household,
Yeah,
that the shaping of our mind is aligned with the care of our mind and our space in the world.
yeah, that makes sense. I'd love anyone else's take on that too. Again, I'd say let's contrast it with proof texting. A scriptural mind is so imbued with the meaning of scripture that we're translating it into life. So,
And you do have a note on intelligent design there, which you're steering us away from using that term, right? Though it
mhm,
is a popular term in some circles.
right. If we approach creation from the standpoint of Christ and from providence, then all of a sudden intelligent design starts to look more pagan in origin. And design is scientifically detectable. Providence isn't. What are we losing if we settle for design? So, if you're interested in my thoughts on this, just go read that lecture on Basil because I try to show how to use intelligent design in a way that, like Basil did, that is lowercase I, lowercase d, and a sense of a delight in the purpose and beauty of things. But also, typically, if you when we talk about intelligent design, that is cast in the same frame of chance and necessity, and arguments are made to show that it wasn't by chance. And so one is already thinking in terms of this duality between chance and necessity. And and I would again suggest that we have a much more profound Christ-centered understanding of creation if we begin with Christ and with providence. We lose so much when we settle for mere design.
Mhm. So Torrance does seem to see Christensen being very influenced by Paul, which having the mind of Christ is a very Pauline thought.
Yeah.
George Florovsky's collected works. Do you have that collection there? The
Oh,
collected
no,
works?
it's in the main library. It's not in the
Okay.
collections.
So the chapter on the lost scriptural mind. So there's a connection here, it seems like, between what it is that the golden tongue and the golden mind, so to speak. If the nature of the mind is informed by scripture, a brilliance, a brightness, a beauty that comes, which when I was, I think, 18 or 19, I memorized Colossians and Philippians. And it has served my whole life, it has served me to see things through a particular way that I only could have gotten by memorizing that.
Wow,
It gave me a
yes.
hearing. And I wish I had done more, but I've always been so grateful for what I did have. I think it ties into this very thing that when your mind is conformed to the nature of Scripture and the God who is implied there, there is an opening up that happens that I think may be part of what it is that this section is looking at.
Yeah, I
At the
think
bottom of
so.
the page, our modern mind needs to be brought under the judgment, now at the top of 15, the judgment of the Word of God, and to be transformed by the mind of Christ. And I think Scripture is partly where it's saying that happens. This is precisely what John Chrysostom set out to do in his own ministry in Antioch and Constantinople, in line with the tradition that had already been set so clearly by Basil of Caesarea and Gregory Nazianzus. Which again, I hear the stories of Jewish traditions of people memorizing the whole of what we call the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible. There are probably people who've done that with the New Testament, but I don't know that I've ever met one. But I have a sense if you do, there is something that what is the point of this chapter, that you would sense something by virtue of that memory. And I do have a lot of scripture memorized, and it just pops out when I'm lecturing, and I just think my poor students think I know all of this, and it's just it's things that happen to pop up in the minute because they do apply. There's certainly more that I haven't memorized than I have, but to believe that the nature of the scripture informed mind, that there are points that are made clear by the Christ who is referred to and the Spirit who brings those things to mind, that there is an ice skating dynamic that, yep, you're out there and you're living it and you haven't got everything, but for this moment, you're going to let all that has come to you now be exercised in a way that does bring a kind of a beauty and engagement in the world. Young Il, I see that hand.
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry I missed the first half of the presentation today.
Hi. Hi.
Hi, but I wanted to ask a general question that was touched upon in last week's talk, and that is actually 2 points. One, um, are we projecting our modern understanding because we have had 200, 300, 400 years of science? Are we kind of projecting that scientific worldview into theology and then reading that back into these Christian writers of the third century, for example, by talking about contingency and nature and all of this? I'm just wondering, are we not doing that? Did they? I mean, obviously, we can't tell what they were actually thinking, but it makes me wonder whether we are not, projecting that into it. And then the second one, which is the opposite direction, and Ken and I were beginning to get into this discussion, is that is there something unique about the Christian faith and our understanding of God and creation that has led to the Western societies, Europe in particular, developing modern science as we know it? Could it have happened under Hinduism, under Confucianism, except, is there something? This is your area of specialty, I understand. You have such extensive history. Because,
Yes.
Boy, young Il, those are two fantastic questions. I'd love to spend from now until midnight talking about them. The library is about to close and I will need to leave in a moment. But let me just say this. I began by noting that Basil's hexameral work was a critical source even for the work of Galileo and Newton, Descartes, others. So so it's it's not like we're going back and trying to read him into a position of importance in science. He already, excuse me, he's someone who I teach. He makes an appearance in my undergraduate course here at OU in the history of science from the beginning to Newton. So, I view him as an essential figure to talk about when discussing science in the Roman era. So he's a towering
Mm.
figure, not just in theology, but in history of science.
Okay.
His work was also important, not just for Europe, but also for the development of physics in Islamic culture. And that has a bearing on your second question.
Hmm.
And I just mentioned this. Copernicus, to take an example, includes observations made in Babylon in 750 BC, uses the Egyptian calendar, has a lunar theory developed in Iran around 1200. I mean, even Copernicus has this vast historical depth.
Mm.
And so, to me, I would say that the whole idea of contingent order is the most interesting example of how Christian faith shaped early modern science. But I personally would argue against a conception that modern science grew out of it because I don't interpret science as starting in the scientific revolution. Most historians of science today do not believe in a scientific revolution. An example would be a common textbook called The Scientific Revolution by Stephen Shapin. The first sentence is, "There was no such thing as the scientific revolution, and this is a book about it." I mean, that's a perfect way to start a book. But that's another question. And what I would say is that modern scholarship that sees deep science both in Asia and in the Middle East, as well as medieval Europe, that actually helps make the case that there's a strong Christian influence in science. There's even a Christian influence in Asian science, which is incredible. These are other stories. What we're able to tell now is that science has never been its own hermetically sealed discipline apart from the surrounding religious views. Religion and science are not incompatible. Christianity is just one case among many. Science should always be understood as being shaped by and embedded in the culture that surrounds it. And so there are trade-offs here, but I'm sorry,
Could
5 o'clock. They're
could I read
locking
the
the
last
doors.
sentence of the chapter?
I have to
Just the,
run. I'm so
you have to
sorry.
run? Okay, I will read it even though you are running.
Okay, thanks. Goodbye,
Thanks,
you all. I
Kerry, for
enjoyed it.
thank you for
Take
Thank
your
you.
care.
time. Blessings. So the last sentence of the chapter, with minds inwardly transformed and sanctified in Christ, we may look in new light upon the whole universe of space and time with an astonishing order and beauty daily being disclosed by our science as the theater of God's self revelation and the sanctum for our worship and praise of the Creator and Redeemer. So there's a lot to cover there, and you can tell Kerry has a mind that just keeps going, and he can go down and quote the books and the days that I spent going through whole collections of botany and physiology and the way it developed and the way that the story of scripture that played out the beginning of the written and also the way art began to play those things out. He has all of it displayed in the many different forms and functions that are there. But again, not a revolution, but the bringing together might be a way of saying it, Young Il, that Christianity facilitated by listening and bringing together the best of that which the world had observed to think in such a way that the orderliness of the world and our intelligence in response to it and seeing it as purposefully created by God is the contribution of Christianity to see that which God has given us eyes to see.
Yeah, that's it. That's very interesting. I mean, clearly there is a very what is it? Rewriting of history to make it out as if science is just came out of the European theater and
Yes.
ignore the influences from the Arabic world and other traditions as well. So
Yeah.
that is interesting. Yeah.
one of my main points on my Tuesday evening lecture was that there are events and then there are interpretations. And if somebody walks by you, you may think, what's wrong with them? How dare they ignore me? And we feel hurt and injured that they didn't. Or you can say, I wonder what's happening with them. They must be preoccupied or whatever. And you have compassion and kindness for them. Most of what we get as science are interpretations without recognizing the nature of the events or the agendas that are being read into the interpretations. And therefore, the nature of the feelings of the war between theology and science are simply the outworkings of interpretations that have taken on a life of their own in competition that need not, and as Torrance is inviting, have a much better place in collaboration of discovering the world, our place in it, and with one another.
Mhm.
Well, very good. Well, next week we are going to have Travis will come and take us through chapter 2. I had someone else, but he wasn't able to do it. So I said, hey, Travis, can you take us through chapter 2? So we have a very competent Torrance scholar in the world of science to take us through chapter 2 next week. But Kerry is as wonderful, and the site that he has many lectures that can be listened to. The one on the handout that he gave us, if you have it up, and you can go right to his both the printed things that he's done as well as the video that's in there as well. So thank you all for showing up today. Blessings
Thank
on
you.
you. Happy St. Patrick's week. I've been wearing green all week. I didn't wear green today, but oh well. Is that your St. Patrick stuff? What do you got?
I put these in the chat. These are two titles of two books that came out within a year of each other, one on Chrysostom and one on Basil of Caesarea, which this whole series was edited by Peter Brown, who for the second half of the 20th century was the dean of the late Roman Empire, the intellectual history of the late Roman Empire. So he made sure to get people to write for the series. J.N.D. Kelly has written the book everybody still uses on early Christian doctrine. So these are no slouch things, and the footnoting is great. And then I keep my copy of Patrology nearby. So if I want to go, they made an Anglo-Saxon translation of Basil's Hexameron. Why did they do that? So yeah, there are a bunch of Saxons sitting around Saxon England reading Hexameron. I don't know why, but
feel free to post those on the reading site for people to be able to access them if you'd like to.
I don't know what the reading site is.
The TF Torrance reading group site, on Facebook. Are you on Facebook? You're on Facebook.
Yeah, we're on Facebook. There's a page for that somewhere.
Good,
You don't
great.
know about the page?
Come on.
How do you get the link?
How do you get the
I
link?
get that, but he posts them for the group. But I'll go look for it, and if I don't find it, I'll get back.
It's the place where I post things for the group. Just post it there.
Oh, all right.
And then, yeah, so that's what I'm suggesting. So that's great.
All right. It's bibliography. It's what I do.
Well, you know what? Where we share our riches with others, and the world is richer for it. So that's good. Good.
Yeah.
Any other questions for everybody before you go?
Yeah, what was the name of the author of Scientific Revolution? Do you remember?
Oh, no, I'm
Was
sorry.
it Kuhn?
No, that's what I noticed.
I can't see anything but the structure of scientific revolutions by Kuhn, but maybe there's something in there somewhere.
I will ask Kerry for the title
Well,
of that.
I'll go back and read or listen to the video
Well, you can also do that. That is
when
also
that
true.
comes out.
I try and get them up as fast as I can. It takes a while for them to upload. I mean, usually I'm start uploading within an hour or two, but it's often not till the next morning that it's actually up and able to be posted. So
Well, what else do you have to do, Marty?
I have a list.
He has a small herb
There's
garden in the
today's
southern
list.
window.
Today's
He
list.
has to clip his
Psalm
basil.
51 today. If you don't mind holding for a second there. I just got my first copy of the
Oh,
upcoming
Wow.
the Psalms, A Sanctuary for the Soul, Psalms 1 through 30. So I'm in the second volume now, but this is released on the 7th of April.
seven.
So
Yeah.
anyway, it looks pretty good. It's pretty rich. I have commendations on the back by Walter Bergman and Jeremy Begbie.
Here it is, right here.
On his iPad.
You've got it on your iPad? Do you already have it?
No, no, it's coming April
It's
7th
coming.
on the
Okay.
Kindle. On the Kindle, though.
On the
There
Kindle.
are
Okay.
there
Very
are
good.
other
Anyway,
modes.
very good.
Yeah.
Blessings on you all. Thanks for being here
Right.
today.
Quick question. When you
Yes.
Oh,
publish, Marty, what kind of copyright do you have for the work? The reason I ask is that I worked at an organization where, the New College Berkeley and the director, for example, published a book, but they went with a small Christian publisher. And after the initial printing, it's just not available anymore. And so it's basically locked behind the copyright, and the
no.
author cannot give away any copies because there are no copies now available. The publisher is no longer publishing it, and so on.
Yeah.
And so I wish that they had some kind of a provision where, after 5 years or whatever time limit, the copyright reverts back to the author if the book is not in print, for example. That's a
With the
big concern.
publishers I've worked with, Stock is the classic company that takes exactly your scenario and republishes. So many of
Uh-huh.
Ray Anderson's books, as well as T.F. Torrance's books, Stock has bought up the copyrights on those to fulfill exactly that need. And none of their things will ever go out of copyright. They will have a eternal making sure that they are available. Zondervan is part of Harper and Row, the third largest publishing company in the world. I think it's the largest Christian publisher. The odds of my Karl Barth series going out of print are likely to be impossible. This publishing company is Morehouse is a subsidiary of Seabury Press. They hold the copyright on the Book of Common Prayer. It's the publishing company of the
Episcopalian.
Episcopalian Church. So the history they have, they are also one of the big five of those who have a longevity that says that things don't go out of print, I believe. So far, I've had either a publisher who is in the business of making sure things are made available, or who they are large enough that I don't have those fears. It's the things that get locked into books. I mean, I have chapters in books that they're a little bit harder to find. But if I'm like T.F. Torrance, in a couple of years, I'll bring together about 10 articles and publish them all as a book.
Yes.
That's
That's a Torrancean.
that's a
Yeah,
Terrencian thing to do.
that's it.
Um,
Your
so
estate
anyway, I am
doesn't
far
think you're
from done. I figure I'll be writing for about another 30 years, and I'm only writing 2 or 3 books and 2 or 3 articles or chapters a year. So by the time I die, they should be able to bury me in books.
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
there we go.
I mean, I'm not so concerned about the large publishers going out of business. I'm just concerned
Yeah.
about them when the number of copies that they sell of a book drops below a certain level, then maybe they'll stop making prints available. That's my concern.
Well,
I
they
think
should
that was a
migrate them to the
concern
internet.
a decade
Yeah.
ago. I think now the nature of the ability to do instant printing and things like that, it will
Okay.
no longer be something that if it could make money, that somebody won't
Yeah.
have a way of publishing it. And
Yeah.
Third Place Books here in Seattle is in Lake Forest Park. They literally have the machine right there next to their new books, old books, and there's the machine. We can print any book that you want that is
Hmm.
within the realm of being printable, and it has a large scope. So I think the future is going to look like nothing being out of bounds. The
Okay.
Internet Archive also has many books that are harder to find that one can
Okay.
access to. So,
Okay.
okay, there we go.
Sounds
But a
good.
great question, and thank you. And Todd, you showed up. You showed up after we're done.
Yep.
Well, see you next time.
Was there something you were looking for, Todd, or?
I was looking for truth. I was so yeah. I was no. I just had a little bit of time, and I thought, man, I wonder if those guys are going late today, and So
We just
thank you.
wondered when you were going to show up. So
Oh, good, good. Yeah, I'm glad I could help
yeah.
dismiss the meeting.
So we
Ah,
acknowledge your presence and are grateful that you're still alive and here with us today.
Stephen
Okay.
Chapin. Stephen Chapin.
You
That's
found
the
it.
guy.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so. Most
Sure.
well-known book title, Scientific Revolution by historian Stephen Chapin. I think
Yeah,
I heard him say Stephen, but we'll see.
that sounds
Okay.
like it. Okay. Blessings.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Blessings. Thank you, Marty.
Blessings.
You bet. Take care.
See you.